in this market, whenever they're trading or buying allowances, the players either they can find better options by taking actions themselves, or they can buy it from others in the market. So the cap and trade kind of lets players choose if they want to buy from others or if they want to take action on their own, and how they want to make a change to try to reduce the greenhouse gases. So what we show here on this graph is there are different ways that we can try to reduce our emissions, and one is through energy efficiency. And at Ameren we have some website called ALTON Energy. I don't know if you guys have heard about that, but this is it provides a list of different actions that people can take as consumers to try to become more energy efficient. And for example, people can replace their incandescent light bulbs with something called compact fluorescent light bulbs that are known to save on energy, or they might buy Energy Star appliances that don't consume as much electricity as others. And then also, we are advocates for promoting conservation, meaning that you try to use less electricity. So like, do we need to keep the lights on in every room all the time? Like if we're not in a room, maybe we should turn them off. Also, ways that we can reduce our greenhouse gases through renewable energy. This is like solar power, wind power, and different things like that, biomass. Also, nuclear power is a way to reduce greenhouse gases, as well as we can try to improve our plants, making them more efficient by installing different types of technologies. And then also, we can take action by creating some offsets. Like I mentioned earlier, if we wanted to install forests that try to sequester the carbon dioxide. So, do you guys have any questions about the cap and trade?
Yeah, now, that's for the United States, but is the rest of the world playing on this field too?
That's a really good question. And internationally, they're trying to come up with a plan, but to date, it doesn't exist. So that's a very good point.
Wouldn't that make sense? That it'd drive our industry out of the area that isn't efficient and send it somewhere that they can do what they want?
Yes, I agree, that's true. And I have some slides, we'll talk about that more, but you're right. We at Ameren, we do believe in climate legislation, but we just want to make sure that it's fair to everyone, and especially our customers, as well as our country, because you're right. There is that chance that we'll drive businesses outside the United States. And the greenhouse gases, it's not just a problem with the United States and China and India that are developing countries. They don't have these regulations right now, so they're producing a lot of CO2 emissions.
Who monitors this?
Who monitors the greenhouse gas? Well,
the permits and
it would be through the federal government, probably the United States Environmental Protection Agency. So this is a comparison of the current legislation. Like I mentioned, the Waxman-Markey bill that was passed in 2009 compared to a bill that's been proposed in the Senate, but it didn't make it to the Senate floor. But what I want to point out is that the regulations go out to 2050. One difference is that in the House of Representatives, the bill had certain standards for renewable energy. And what that means is that they would set certain targets over time that would require a certain amount of generation to be produced from like solar power or from wind power or other types of renewable energy. So this is a map or a graph that shows where emissions are today and what this legislation proposed, what they're trying to do. So the black line at the top is like a business as usual case. And this is what would happen over time if we did not have climate legislation. We believe that there would be an increase in emissions due to maybe consumption or population increases. But the red and the green lines, that represents the current legislation and what they're trying to do as far as reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. So the gap between the black and the red, that's the gap we're trying to, I guess, reduce our emissions. So that's a big gap. So at Ameren, we hired a third party, another consulting firm, to conduct an analysis of what this Waxman-Markey bill would mean, like what kind of impact it would have on region and states. So they did a lot of modeling, made a lot of assumptions, And so I'd like to share with you some of the results. In particular, I'll talk about what this could mean to our the price of electricity, natural gas, as well as employment, and what it might mean to the future generation mix, how we generate electricity. So what this graph is trying to show is the result of the Waxman-Markey analysis as far as the generation of electricity. And so in 2015, we think that we could see an increase of over 30% in the generation of electricity. And then by 2050, it could increase by over 60, or even more than that, higher than that, 70%. So our bills, our electricity bills have three components. One is a distribution charge, a service charge, and electricity generation charge. So So this is kind of what it means to us as far as a consumer, how this would translate to our electricity bill. And early on, we would probably see like a 5% increase in 2015, but then by 2030, it could increase by over 25%. So this graph here is trying to show us what it would mean if we got these permits through through an allocation process, which means for free, or if it's all through an auction. So if we do get the permits for free, then in 2015, we think that we would see less than a 5% increase, but if we have to pay for all of our permits, then we could see an increase of over 20%. So not only will the price of electricity increase, but we'll also see an increase in the price of natural gas, because CO2 emissions are a byproduct of the combustion of natural gas also. So in 2015, we think that we would see an increase of over 20%, and by 2050, it would be in excess of 50%. So not only will, like I said, electricity and natural gas prices increase, but it's very likely that we'll see increases in other products that we purchase also, because normally this is passed on to the customer. So we also think that this legislation would have an impact on employment in our area. We think that it would result in some job losses. In 2015, we think that we could see potentially over 100,000 jobs being lost, and by 2050, maybe over 150,000 jobs being lost in our area. So, and one other thing that I wanted to talk about is what the kind of impact this legislation would have in terms of our generation mix. And this is a busy graph, but what this is trying to show, let's look at the case in the middle, year 2030. We have a comparison of a BAU case, which is business as usual, compared to the Waxman-Markey legislation case. And without the legislation, we think that we would still have about 60% of our generation from coal-fired power plants, and also we'd have a small percentage that would deal with something called carbon capture and sequestration. This is when you use a coal-fired power plant, but you capture the carbon dioxide emissions, and it's sequestered and it's put underground. And this is something that we're talking about doing at our Meridosha plant. It's a future Gen 2 project. So we would still use a lot of coal-fired power in the United States. But with the legislation, a comparison, that percentage is reduced to maybe less than 30%. And in addition, one major change is there's like a blue box in the bar chart, and what that represents is something called load reduction. And we feel like we would see load reduction as a result of companies maybe moving outside the United States, or through energy efficiency measures that people are taking at their own homes.